was FaceTiming with my soon-to-be baby. We weren't allowed in the hospital, and so I had to do it remotely. And I remember thinking at that moment, this is probably the most significant thing that I'll ever do in my professional career, in one hand, and probably the most significant thing I'll ever do in my life in the other. And then, of course, we saw all of the other tragedies and traumas that have been inflicted on our community throughout the rest of 2020 and even into 2021. I remember looking back to when I was in employment and a civil rights attorney. We saw this constantly. Someone would get sick. They get sick and they couldn't make it into work. They lose their job. They lose their job. They weren't getting a regular salary or payment. They couldn't pay the rent. They get evicted. And next thing you knew, they were homeless. Because of the pandemic, this has happened over and over and over again. Mayor Carter mentioned, I think it was 80,000 individuals that were seeking unemployment. I think it was well over 100,000 in Minneapolis. And we had the obligation to step up. And, we did. Through emergency rental assistance, we were able to help around 1,600 individuals. And I'll tell you, as soon as we opened up the application process, the floodgates just were open. I mean, people needed help desperately. 85% of those that we're able to allocate funds to were BIPOC, but that barely scratches the surface as to the need. That barely scratches the surface as to the need for both renters as well as owners, and thank you for being here, Christina, that we would see over the next, perhaps, year. And so this is a milestone in that we are seeing very much a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a milestone both in terms of the funds, the $12.8 million that we are receiving from the city of Minneapolis from December, and also the money that we hope to get very soon. And it'll be put to good use. It'll be put to making sure that people have homes, that housing is a right. And through some of these most difficult circumstances over this last year, people have the ability to go home to a place they cherish, to close the door on the world, and to rejuvenate for the next day. You don't necessarily realize how important that is until you don't have that home. And so I want to thank all of our community partners that have been working tirelessly on the ground to make this possible, and that will be working tirelessly to allocate what is a pretty significant amount of money to people who need it. I know they'll continue to provide that steadfast support to our residents, helping them to understand how crucial this access to emergency rental assistance is. And I want to note yet again that it's RentHelpMN.org. RentHelpMN.org. You can also call 211. Please make sure you do it if you need assistance. And with that, I will turn it back over to our governor, who I know has been working tirelessly on this topic. Governor Walz.
Thanks, Mayor. We'll get ready for the questions. I'm going to pitch a story to the press here. I spoke with Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Fudge, here a few weeks back, and noted, and these are humble folks who do this work, and it's a lot of our nonprofit partners are out there. It's a small community, and they all know each other, but the work of Commissioner Ho, Kathy Tenbrook, Monica Weber, there's names out there that all of us know. The Secretary noted how Minnesota was ranked at the top of all states in providing shelter for the unsheltered homeless and for others during this time. That's the Minnesota heart in this, and that's what this is really all about. So incredibly grateful. There's a great story there to be told, and a lot of work every morning on Lieutenant Governor and I and the commissioners on our COVID briefing. The section on housing was early on deeply concerning, and then after a while became the uplifting moment of a lot of those briefings because of the work that was being done. So leave it all for questions for anyone, and of course Commissioner Ho is the expert here.
Commissioner, these dollars are going out a bit later than you anticipated and later than a lot of landlords would like. Can you walk through the reason for the delay and when exactly they'll land in folks' bank accounts?
Thank you. Oops, I haven't done this for a while, so stick with me. There really hasn't been a delay. If you think about it, this money was passed by Congress and signed by the last president at the end of December. And then a new president took office in the middle of January. A new secretary sat down at the Treasury, and they said, hold on a minute. We're going to take a look at what the previous administration told you about using this money, and we're just going to revisit that. And then at the end of February, we got updated guidance from the new Treasury Department, and in 59 days, we launched RentHelpMN. It's amazing how there's this time warp during COVID, and it's just been remarkable speed with which we've done this, and I'm just really proud of my team and all of our partners for doing that. Should I just stay up here and take questions, Governor?
Sure, I think they'll probably come to you.
Applications are coming in the door right now. So it's $375 million total to the state. $290 million came to Minnesota Housing. The rest was distributed to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Anoka, Dakota, Ramsey, and Washington and Hennepin counties. We have built a shared platform, RentHelpMN.org, and so people can get their applications in. The most important message that I have today is that the speed of processing an application is completely predicated on our having a completed application. The best thing that a renter can do is talk to their property manager, go over the checklist of everything that's required in the application, so that when they sit down together at RentHelpMN.org, they can do a completed application. If we get an incomplete application, it is going to take us longer to reach out to you, have you get back to us. When I say us, it's a big partnership. So getting that checklist and getting prepared is really important. The other key message I would convey is that this is an enormous amount of money. And so it's not a lottery. It's not going to be open last week and close next week. We're going to be running this program well into 2022. The March additional money is going to allow us to do that. So this isn't a sprint. So the best thing to do is just be prepared, do a complete application. We can go all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic. If you weren't able to get assistance last year, we can do 15 months in total. And there's a really unique feature that we never see in federal emergency assistance programs anyways, is that in this program, if you are eligible for back rent, you can also ask for 3 months to pay it forward at the same time. And that means that you're going to have the peace of mind, and the property manager is going to have the peace of mind that you're good. You're good for the next 3 months. So 15 months total. This is a much longer program. And so people have time to work together on a solid application, and a solid application will make it through our system faster to get the payment out the door to the owners. And I know that that's the most important thing to the owners.
So applications are coming in. Has any money gone out yet?
We've been up and running for 10 days. We are sorting through the applications to figure out which % of them are eligible and not eligible, which of them are complete and not complete. We have not cut a check yet, but we don't have a verified, completed application yet. It needs to go through a verification process. We need to make sure that the landlord has registered, and we have all the information from the landlord, the utility companies, if you're applying for utilities, and then that all gets matched, and the last thing that happens is that the check gets cut.
I was on the website this morning, and what wasn't clear to me was the number of months. Is there a number of months maximum that someone can get paid?
The federal program allows for up to 15 months of assistance. That covers, so for some folks that will go back, and it means they won't have as much available going forward. But for somebody who's only not been able to pay rent since January, that means potentially they could have help with rent if they stay unemployed into next year.
I see, thanks.
Mm-hmm. We're still working on the definition of an application because some people, I joke that the advocates could be going out into RentHelpMN.org and just typing in their name because they want to see how it works, and then they never come back again. Is that an application? Some people went in and started one. Some landlords went in and started one for their renters. So we're trying to figure out all the different gates in the process and what we call that. What do we call somebody who is just a tourist to the website but who got started? What do we call it when a tenant or a landlord started but didn't finish? What do we call it when they hit submit? because I think it's just going to be really important because I know exactly which questions you're going to ask me for the next 6 months. And so we want to make sure we get those definitions down. As soon as we have that sorted through, like I said, we just have 10 days of data right now, and we're just trying to work with our partners to make sure that we have clear agreement on what we mean when we say that. Because if I tell you we had 20,000 clicks on the website, and then I tell you in 2 months that we've only made 5,000 payments, you're going to ask what happened to the other 15,000 people. So I want to make sure that we get started on the right foot when we start talking about the numbers. I'll have a much better sense of this after we see the first wave of applications come in. We're still in the first wave of applications coming in. Some numbers I can tell you to just give you a sense of scale is that since we opened last Tuesday at noon, 211 has taken 5,402 phone calls. Wait time is less than 2 minutes. So if you have a question, please call 211. Wait time is less than 2 minutes. But to give you a sense of that scale, we think that between 50 and 100,000 renters in Minnesota are behind. And there's some survey data that suggests as many as 100 to 200,000 households in Minnesota aren't confident that they're going to be able to make rent. There's a second allocation of money coming from the American Recovery Act that was passed in March, but we have not received our allocation yet. So we don't know even what the total dollar amount is that we'll have to move through this program. But we do know that the March stimulus bill pushed the deadline for using funds out into 2022. So again, this isn't a sprint. It's not a lottery. We're going to have emergency rental assistance available to people well into next year. So getting yourself into that system, getting all the right paperwork so we can verify who's owed what, ask for the 3 months of prospective at the same time, enjoy that peace of mind, and then if you get through that 3 months and you're still not working, you still can't pay the rent, you just come back, log right back in. Keep your password. So the application requires the tenants to participate because they need to provide some private information that a landlord wouldn't have about you. And it works best if the resident and the property manager are working together, because then the property manager plugs in information. I'm sure Christina did this for the properties. And then you produce a W-9 if you're an owner, and you provide the bank account that you want the money deposited into. And then when everything is in the application complete, then it's verified that this is the right amount. This goes to Excel. This goes to, whom else. This is what goes to the owner. And then that'll be an automatic deposit whenever possible. We can cut a check. In instances where a landlord would not participate, the Congress and the Treasury give us permission to pay the tenant directly so that the tenant can pay their back rent and make good on that. I think for the vast majority of circumstances, we're going to see renters and property managers working together. This is a win-win. This is a total win-win. Everybody gets to pay their bills.
If somebody submits a viable application today, ballpark, how long would it take before they get the money?
The initial deluge of applications and just people not having been used to it, I think we're going to have to see how long it takes. We're hoping that we reach a steady state once we clear the initial backlog. One of our partners has 140 people sitting in a kind of working centrally. They're probably not sitting in the same place. I actually have no idea where they're sitting. But 140 people who have been trained to go through and see, is the application complete, incomplete? If it's incomplete, it goes over here. How do we reach out to this person? What else do we need to get? If it's complete, it goes over here. Somebody checks. Have they checked all the boxes that the Treasury requires? Is the landlord there? Are these two things connected? And then they approve for payment, and then the payment piece is the very last thing that happens. So I think, I don't know when we'll hit the steady state because I don't know how big the first wave is. And there's so many things at play here, right? I mean, when people get the stimulus check, they're not behind on their rent oftentimes. But then the stimulus check, it gets spent. If people are on unemployment, they might get the bump up for a while, but if the bump up ends, they lose that. So there's all these other factors at play in terms of trying to, I'm not an economist, of trying to guess how this is going to work. And because it has some elements that are very different from what the state ran last year, especially that 3-month pay it forward. Like what the average amount per household is going to be, both in the first instance and overall. There's just a lot of unknowns. This is big, it's complicated, it's brand new, and it's amazing.
Commissioner, the history of big, complicated, brand new, amazing programs is that you will find out at some point later on that there were problems with them, there were glitches, and that money was potentially,
Well, thank you. I was having a hard time figuring out where I was.
Sorry, I'm a ventriloquist with this microphone. And that money was often misspent or went to the wrong place or even fraud. Is there anything built in to try to be auditing how this is going as it moves along?
That's a fantastic question with a boring bureaucratic answer, so forgive me. I met with my peer group, other state housing finance leads through our trade association when we found out this money was coming. And we compared it to stimulus money that came during the Great Recession and the housing crisis. And a lot of that money, because it was a housing crisis, was housing related. What did we learn from that money that we wanted to apply to this money? First of all, some of that money from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act is still in its tail. Some of that money has not been completely spent. Some of that money is in its compliance audits right now. So the way that I'm approaching it is that my successor will work with Secretary Yellen's successor to audit this program. And so I've got to build a program. I owe it to my successor to build a program that has all the internal controls and compliance features so that I don't give my successor that headline. That said, I am standing on a tightrope with compliance on my right, we'll make compliance on my right, and people who desperately need this program on my left. And so I can't build a program that's only thinking about compliance, or it's not going to work for people who don't have access to the internet, aren't used to working with government programs, maybe don't have English as their first language. So, as we built this program, we really had to be able to hold those two, sometimes, competing or conflicting factors in our mind at the same time. Thanks for the tolerance of the bureaucratic answer.
Governor, a question on how this all interplays with the eviction moratorium. How important in your mind is this money to ending the moratorium? And there's competing proposals in the legislature as far as an off-ramp. Which do you support? How long of an off-ramp do you support?
Yeah, I think, and then they're debating that. I think the good news is they are important. The question is really good. This does have a big impact on the moratorium because it starts to make people whole. It gives us the time to reset for those families, but also for us to think where the moratorium ends. The good news on this is this was one of the things I sent over in December to the legislature and said, if you want to take over some of these things, start working together to get this. I think they're really close on this, and all the feedback to me from my team as they brief me of where the negotiations are around the end of the moratorium are pretty close. You're right. One says a year, the other says 6 months. I mean, I think we're thinking we have to think about the people, try and give some time in that. We obviously think more time is better to get people settled, but we're open to hearing from them. So I do think that's a critical point. Christina brought up a great point. This way I don't want to get in trouble, Commissioner, to help me, mentioning utility help too in this. And I know you said that, we want to keep stressing that. And I'll just say this as a point of personal privilege. I've held more in-person meetings in the last 2 weeks than I have in a year, I think, with many. And I will have to say, there are countless reasons why I have missed Commissioner Ho, but competency right today is at the top of that. So thank you. I think all of you are seeing this, and these questions are great. But it's good for us just to be back face to face. But I think, here's what I would say on this. Of the issues that are being debated right now over there, I think an end and an off-ramp on the eviction moratorium is I think it is most likely probable they will get that worked out in the next couple weeks, and that will happen.
I don't know if this question's been put to you before, but is it fair to say you would not end the moratorium without an off-ramp in place?
That's right, I wouldn't. And I think this is a big piece towards that off-ramp. I think I think what's really great in having a property manager here who understands their renter and the compassion that's there. Sometimes in this issue around housing and rent, we set up adversarial situations that aren't that real. We need folks to own these buildings and to build them. We need people to manage them. We need people to rent them, and we need people to have the money to be able to rent them. And so I think trying to find that is very doable. I think without that eviction moratorium, I mean, we saw the economic cost of this, but I'm not sure if I get this right. I think it was Dartmouth or somebody did the study. Eviction moratoriums in place saved up to 200,000 lives during the pandemic, as they said, had they been pushed into the street, had there been more interaction. So keep in mind, this decision on the eviction moratorium was simultaneously cares about the individual to be there, but it was a public health decision too. I think now as we're coming again towards the end of the public health emergency as we see it, it makes more sense for us to start finding those off-ramps. And this program is a huge piece of it. Yeah, and that is the essence of democracy. And I will say, since yesterday when I was asked if there have been any productive conversation around this, I said no. The answer is yes today. There are. We met in person to talk about this. And again, the emergency powers aren't something that are enjoyable, we want to hold on to. They're there because they serve a purpose, and they're being replicated in basically every other state. There's implications, as we've talked about, federal assistance and that. But with that being said, I'm certainly, and we're trying to understand, I think, and I won't speak for folks, but I think there's a lot of folks that conflate COVID mitigation with emergency powers. I don't think that the Senate Republicans are asking me to stop vaccinating or close down the state fair site, which would close down because we would no longer have an agreement with FEMA. I don't believe they're asking me that. I don't believe they're asking me to send back $40 million in supplemental food assistance. What they're asking is what's the off-ramp of things like the eviction moratorium? What's the off-ramp on business capacity limits? And those are things we're talking about. And as I alluded to, and you're still seeing the numbers, we're at a point now where we did what I thought we could do, and I want to thank Minnesotans. We out-vaccinated the surge, and we are really approaching some critical numbers if we can keep people going of 70% of our population over 16 vaccinated. That's a big deal. So I think the answer is yes. But I would make very clear on this. We have those emergency powers in place to protect public health, public safety, and what we've seen around the systemic racism around it is absolutely critical. We get this done. And that's coming from all quarters, the business community, the advocate community, elected officials, as well as police. So I think here, like so many things, and it frustrates the tar out of people, you don't want to know your sausage making, there should be a grand agreement around keeping Minnesota's finances the best in the country as we have. We did it last time with a budget. Get that budget done, do some things that need to be necessary of moving forward around public safety, and then resetting to the new place we're at in the pandemic that keeps folks safe, but also folks want to get back to, as we've seen, doing the things that make life so enjoyable. So I'm hopeful. Being in Congress, I saw it, and then going through an entire session, Lieutenant Governor and I, in 2019, I started that budget in the day after the election, got all ready, had the inauguration, the session started, and I was there on the first day to negotiate. and they thought I was insane and ignored me until May. This time I did not make that mistake. I did all my homework. I know that budget. We know line by line, but I did not pressure the legislature to get to the table and get this done. Today, I think, was probably that first informal conversation and candidly about, well, this is bugging us about what you're doing. This is bugging us about what you're doing. How do we start to get into that place? The good news is the place we're at in the pandemic, the place we're at fiscally, and the opportunity we have around public safety are coming together at kind of a nexus point. And I'm pretty hopeful today that we can do that. And this program, I think, is a piece to help that.
Governor, on a similar topic, next week you're going to announce some easing of COVID restrictions. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because you've alluded to where we are in the pandemic, and I think now maybe more than ever before is the argument to be made that businesses, especially bars and restaurants with capacity limits and entertainment venues, people who can get a vaccine are now able to get a vaccine, and people who don't want to get vaccinated at this point are more just putting themselves at risk than others. What is your thought process going on?
I think generally that's a fair statement, and I think it's one that does weigh into this. As we said all along, it's trying to take public health data, intersection with well-being, intersection with economic realities for folks, and then trying in that Venn diagram find that middle spot. And we kept moving the dial to try and keep those things aligned. I think that's right, and I think, as I said last week, I think we're realizing there's probably only a couple turns left, and if again, I just tell you this, what keeps me up now is, and all of us are seeing it, seems like COVID does this to us. The situation in India is catastrophic, and I hope people are listening. It's catastrophic for us. If that thing gets a variant that becomes able to break through on, and I'm not saying it's happening, but that's the fear of the epidemiologist, that it breaks through. So I think now this idea that we just vaccinate our state and to heck with the rest of the states, we just vaccinate our country, the heck with the rest of the countries, we've got to start thinking broader. But with that being said, Minnesota is at a different place. The vaccines prove themselves in the real world. I know it sounds kind of, they're putting this out now that we can say with a lot more certainty, when you get a certain number of people vaccinated, fewer people end up in the hospital and fewer die. Now everybody said, well, of course, that's why we were doing all this. Yeah, but we never saw it in the real world. I believe, and we'll analyze this, trying to understand why Minnesota had more B117 than anybody but Michigan is really interesting right now. Is it because of the hub of the airport? What happened there? But the fact is, if you look at us, the only difference between Michigan and Minnesota in this latest one was they nearly spiked out on hospital space. They had a pretty catastrophic situation. We had probably the same amount of virus circulating in B117, but we were about 10 percentage points higher on vaccinations, and that made the difference. So I think back to your question, Dave, we're approaching a real critical number, which the epidemiologists and everyone said. It's a floor, but it's an important floor, 70%. Significantly slows the spread of this. So I think in answer to your question, those are exactly the questions we're asking now. And we're going through the same set of traps we do every time. We're getting presentations from MDH. We're seeing the lag period data. I'll be meeting after this with representatives of the business community. What's possible? How do we roll things back into place? So I'm still optimistic, as we said, once we started to see vaccine numbers really start to accelerate, that President Biden set July 4th as pretty much a return to normal. I think we've been outpacing a lot of that. And as folks start thinking about it, as long as we tamp down what we're seeing in schools, as long as we tamp down about this younger folks getting infected, we do some of the smart things over the next few weeks, we should be able to move in that direction. I myself anticipating, and I think for us, the touchstone place is state fair. Everything looks to me on the horizon and where the vaccine is going and the way that the virus is responding, that should be a pretty close to normal event.
How close to a decision are you? Are you truly waiting until next week to decide? And then secondly, is it going to be one of those where if we reach, as some other states have done, if we reach this percentage of vaccination, or if we reach this lower level of infection rate, then this will happen?
There needs to be triggers, and I'm talking to those governors who are making those decisions. They're listening to us. we're evaluating across the country. I'm asking, what did Indiana do? What's Indiana doing? How's it happening? Show me what Oregon looks like. Show me what Florida looks like. What are their requirements? What are those numbers they hit? I do think so, but as I've said very clearly, that test positivity rate and the vaccination rates are now coinciding perfectly with decreased death rates, decreased hospitalizations. Those are the two that I'm looking at. So I do think when we hit that, I think those, again, we view the state as a whole. Those who have said, what about counties that have reached 80% vaccination rates and the county next to them is at 30%? Is that going to be different? We talked about this early in the pandemic. That causes a lot of problems. People are mobile. They move amongst different counties. But I do think we'll set some of those things. I think the good news for Minnesota is if you look at other states, many of those thresholds they're setting to turn their dials, if you would, we've already met them or we're close to it. We've accelerated very quickly. And I think this is a great success story over February, March, and April was the amount of folks that got vaccinated in Minnesota. And again, I'm going to make this pitch, the amount of folks taking it. And I will still make my pitch that there are numerous reasons people haven't been vaccinated yet. And I would argue it's not simply ideological or anti-vaxxer mentality. There's other factors that are going into that. And we are seeing people continue to be vaccinated. So, well, I appreciate you all being here. I would be remiss if I did not say this. Today is Dave Lee Day across Minnesota, so as journalists, I would fully expect you'll be congratulating him because you too can do 32 years of reporting and get your own day in Minnesota. So Dave, congratulations. Thanks, everybody.